It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
Now let's talk about folks in their 40s. Because if we're going to be honest, if you're in your 40s, this is not the first recession that you've gone through.
Yeah.
And likely you can look back and say, okay, how did I do in 2008? What were the good decisions that I made and what were the bad decisions that I made? What were the ideas that I jumped on that I should not have? And what were the opportunities that I missed? You get to kind of do an assessment of where am I today and where was I 14 years ago and what things have changed? How is my income situation different? How are my family circumstances different? How are my looming obligations like paying for college or becoming an empty nester? How are those things different than they were the last time I went through this?
So as you were going through this, every bit of this resembled our relationship. We've been together now, working together for the full cycle
whole
here.
time.
And as you're going through that, because I remember 14 years ago going through as a business owner, I remember feeling frustrated in the fact that I'm helping clients get through this, but I'm also trying to keep everything together with the company.
Sure.
To the point, I even had a talk with you. I was like, look, you're an incredible, we're co-working together and everything's going good. But if this keeps going bad,
we might have to renegotiate some stuff.
We need to figure things out.
Yeah.
And so I think you're exactly right when we talk about, I want anybody who's in their 40s, you've been around long enough, you can recall what it was like in 2008, 2009. So, but you are probably now in a completely different financial situation, hopefully for the better. So now you have more resources, you have more flexibility, more margin to do this recession on your terms instead of just hanging on because you were in that messy middle previously.
All right, so let's talk about where to focus. Here's the very first thing I think that folks in their 40s ought to be thinking about. Do you actually have a plan? Have you started answering the question, what is my number? You know, in your 20s and 30s, we really focus on savings rate. We say, hey, you need to be saving 20 to 25% of your gross income. If you can do that, you're setting yourself up to have options in the future. Well, in your 40s, you want to start answering the question, all right, what have I been doing this for? What is my number? What's the goal that I am working towards? How do I know if enough is enough? How do I know if I'm ahead of the curve? How do I know if I'm behind the curve? How do I know if I don't even know where the curve is? In your 40s, you should begin to have some clarity around the answers to those questions.
Yeah, and look, we'd be crazy if we didn't share. The financial order of operations is going to be tremendously valuable. I think for somebody in their 40s, look, I could give you the website for a free deliverable. It's moneyguy.com/resources, but really, more likely, you could benefit from learn.moneyguy.com, where we actually have a full deep dive course. If you're not even at the point, because maybe you are realizing blind spots, I got 7 figures that I'm out there flopping around this crazy financial market. Maybe you need to take the relationship to the next level and bring in a co-pilot. These are the type of things that are very important when you're in your 40s.
All right, so step 1 is, do you actually have a plan? Step 2, Brian, I want you to speak to this one because this one is something, you know, we obviously see this with clients and we counsel clients through this, but you've actually lived with peers who have done this. You have colleagues and friends and neighbors. Oftentimes, it seems like in our 40s, we start moving the goalpost. Well, if I could just get to this income, or if I could just get to this asset level, or if I could just own this house, or if I could just go to have this vacation property, and we keep moving the goalposts further and further and further and further out. And in your 40s, you have to answer the question, why? What am I doing that for?
Well, I think it's so important, especially if you focus on the why, because I do think that there can be, and boredom's not the right word, but distractions, and the fact that when you're in your 40s, you're now far enough outside of when you graduated where you were struggling just to get traction in your career. Now you're actually starting to earn some peak earning years. So income's coming in. And if you don't have a centeredness in the why, you can keep changing your life to really try to keep up with the Joneses. And I'm telling you, that the why is where the contentment lives. The bigger house, the
nicer
boat
car,
or RV, and the nicer car, that stuff is not, that's a temporary hedonic treadmill dopamine hit. It's not actually getting you closer to the goalpost of success. So just quit moving the goals and objectives. That's why we always say the moving the goalposts is it's a mirage. Be careful, put up some boundaries so you know the why and you can create a plan around that.
Now, you said something interesting, Brian. You said in your 40s, you're likely in your peak earning years. As a reminder, there is still time for you to automate your wealth building process at this point in time. Maybe you were doing a good job following the financial order of operations in your 30s, and you're doing a great job saving 20 to 25% of your income. But now your income has increased. Maybe you're starting to get bonuses. You're starting to get employer incentives. You've got RSUs. You have other things coming in. It is not a bad idea, especially right now while everything is on sale and you're still accumulating, to revisit your saving strategy. Am I actually saving 25% of my gross income? And am I putting all of the dollars in the right buckets where they should go so that I am ultimately building towards that number that I need to hit to be able to live the life I want to live the way I want to live it?
Well, I think it'd be inappropriate to not at this point also point out something we both do that's a great measurement, especially in these times, on what to focus on. Net worth statement.
Oh, it's huge.
I mean,
Huge.
if you're not taking advantage of having a measuring tool to know how you're doing on turning your income into actually the silent part of wealth, which is what is growing on the net worth statement, take a time to take an inventory of what you got. What do you have? What do you owe? How are things going when you compare that to your income? By the way, if you go to, I believe this is also learn.moneyguy.com as well. We have a net worth tool that not only is a net worth statement, but it's going to give you metrics of understanding and a dashboard to see how well you're doing with this wealth building process.
It's a great way to know, where am I on my journey and am I moving in the right direction? All right, Brian, so that's where to focus on in your 40s. Let's talk about some of the things to forget in our 40s. Here's the first one. The desire to go to cash to feel safe. Odds are in your 20s, maybe you didn't have a portfolio. And in your 30s, your portfolio started to build. You started to save a little more. Well, in your 40s, this is likely the place where you're starting to have a substantial sum of assets inside your army of dollar bills. And you start having this thought that, man, I've just worked too hard to get here. I've been saving really good and the market's making me feel uncomfortable. Maybe I just need to sit this one out. Maybe I just need to go to the sidelines, let this thing smooth out a little bit, and then I'll get back in.
Well, I even think some people in their 40s specifically, they might not be like your 50 and 60-year-olds who are getting closer to retirement. They think about doing a apple cart turnover. But I do think 40-somethings, they run the risk of, they already have a chunk of money in their portfolio and they say, hey, instead of making sure I am taking advantage of these huge buying opportunity, allocating resources, keeping the 25% flowing towards investing, a lot of people say, you know what? I think I got enough in there. Let's just focus on other things I need to be doing in life right now. That is a mirage that can get you into financial trouble. So don't fall astray. I know you're not in the same emotional response, as a behavioral response as a 50 or 60-year-old, but you still are highly susceptible to making a mistake here.
And there's a great thing I'd like to remind you of. This is a famous quote by Peter Lynch. He's a well-known money manager. He said, far more money has been lost by investors trying to anticipate corrections than lost in the corrections themselves. So if you are someone who say, man, I want to sit on the sidelines, or this makes me uncomfortable, or I'm thinking about going to cash, there's a chance that that single decision may actually be costing you more than if you were to just drive through it, ride through the downturn, and be positioned for the upturn. Because when it happens quickly.
Yeah, and that's what, don't try to time this at all, because you will outsmart yourself sure as they come. I think a lot of people, really bright people say, hey, I just want to be comfortable. I will get back in at a good time. I'm not saying I want to be out of investing. I just need to take a breather. This is a trap. And let me show you, we've actually pulled the data on this, is that the average loss when we hit bear market status. Now, look, we don't know if it's going to be 35%, it could be 25%. We just know we've crossed the 20% threshold. We are in a bear market. We know the typical average is around 13, 14 months, somewhere in that range. But nobody knows. And by the way, we're 5 to 6 months already through this process right now. It can be as short as like 4 or 5 months. Think about
COVID,
the pandemic.
Right?
We hit bear market status, recovered within 5 months. Recessions typically take a little bit longer, but it could be, especially when the valuations start looking better. But pay attention, time after we hit the bottom of the market, this happens quick. The first month after we hit the bottom of the bear market, you'll see 14.76% rate of return on average if you look at past recoveries. If you fast forward to 12 months, 43.51%. That's a lot of movement. If you look at 2 years, the average is close to 63%. You do not want to blink and sit on the sidelines because markets typically recover in a V-shaped recovery. You do not want to be on the sidelines for that.
So here's another thing that we often hear people say in their 40s, right? They have this desire to go to cash to feel safe. We also hear them say, oh, well, I just don't have enough time. The market's already passed me by. I should have been doing stuff in my 20s and 30s. I am out of luck. That is just not the case. If you're in your 40s and you just start saving, starting at zero, we want to show you how much of your pre-retirement income you can replace if you start saving 25% today. So a 40-year-old, and we assume that someone has wage increases of 1.5%, so nothing crazy, and we assume you can invest your dollars earning only 6% rate of return. So we have very conservative assumptions. A 40-year-old that starts today saving 25% of their gross income, by the time they get to retirement at 65, would be able to replace 58% of their pre-retirement income. For a 45-year-old, even if you just start saving today, you'd still be able to replace 39% of your pre-retirement income. These are still pretty remarkable numbers for someone who hasn't done any saving up until this point. You still have a long window where you can begin building assets for your future.
Well, here's what I think is super powerful about this too. Right? Now, look, I'm not saying don't start investing just in case my 20 and 30-year-olds are watching and cheating ahead, but I do want people in their 40s to recognize more than likely there's going to be some other influences on your retirement living. When we retire, we typically spend, since you're not having to save 20 and invest 25% of your income, that's a huge saving. If you don't have any debt as you approach retirement, that's another huge savings opportunity there. So there's a good chance that 60%, that 58 to 60% is going to cover a lot of your living expenses. And then what if, because the older you get, closer to 50 especially, more than likely there will be some type of Social Security or social safety net that will be sitting there. You get to add that on top of what you have saved. So whether there's outside money coming in or your living expenses in retirement are less because of the not needing to save for retirement anymore or not funding that mortgage anymore, you can still do it even in your 40s.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. So you don't have enough time. Here's another thing that we also hear, and I think this is a mindset shift. There's this idea of that, okay, when a recession happens, well, it's happening for everyone else, right? It's not. I'm in a good spot. I've done well in my career. I've worked to a great spot. I've been saving. So maybe I don't really need to worry about my employment, or maybe I don't really need that emergency fund, or maybe I don't really need to be saving because I've got plenty of time to save. Don't assume that a recession only affects everyone else. One of the things that we see are unknowns happen. This may be market volatility, your portfolio falling. This may be unemployment. By no fault of your own, your employer has a reduction in force. Or maybe you're someone who said, okay, I've been paying on my mortgage for a number of years and I've got tons of home equity inside. I'm just going to use that as my cash reserves. And all of a sudden, real estate values drop, your home equity dries up, and you are left holding the bag. Make sure that just because things have worked out really good at this part, to this stage of life, you don't take your eye off the ball and leave yourself exposed and out there on the risk spectrum.
Yeah, on that home equity line, been there, done that. Respect the value of having liquidity, especially in dark times. There's a reason people like Warren Buffett do so well. I mean, you want to make sure you have cash. Cash is that last degree of oxygen. It's just like oxygen. We take it for granted, but man, when it leaves the room, you are so glad that you can breathe freely when you're above water. But when you're underwater, you know how important it is to have that oxygen. It's the same thing with your cash. Don't rely upon that home equity. That could be a disaster.